In this latest Courageous Conversation, Griefline's Bryan Petheram interviews retired police officer Keith Banks about his life in and out of the police force, his experience with trauma, and more importantly, his strategies to repair his mental health while encouraging others to do the same. This open and frank conversation is one you cannot miss.
Today I'm joined by Keith Banks. Keith is a retired police officer, author, speaker, and advocate. Keith's on a personal mission, which is to help people build resilience and lead fulfilling personal and professional lives. Keith is a passionate advocate for those who suffer from anxiety, depression, and the effects of trauma. And it's a real honour to be able to interview him today or have a conversation. Welcome to our Courageous Conversation series, Keith.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Mate, very, very honoured and flattered to be invited. So, cheers.
Absolutely. I've had the privilege to do my research and to read about you, and it's clear that you're doing so much in the community.
Thanks. Mate, I left the police in '95. I suppose we'll jump straight into it, Brian.
Absolutely.
I tend just to have conversations rather than go through scripts and stuff. And
sure.
And I left the cops in '95, and I left probably in the wrong mental state where I was just pissed off with some things that had happened, not just to me but to my friends, and I'd been involved in some pretty risky stuff, as you know, and I'd been told by a particular senior policeman, and I have told this story a lot, that I wouldn't be promoted anytime soon because of my personality needed to change, because I was too outspoken and challenged authority, because I was too supportive of the people I was working with. And I was told, if I wanted to be promoted, I needed to change sides of the fence, be one of them, not one of the people I was with. I've been decorated, and the publicity wasn't doing me any good. All of those sorts of conversations that in hindsight were probably just one person's opinion, but I was so, in hindsight, I was so traumatized, I took it to be the opinion of the entire police service, department, force. And it disappointed me, and it made me angry. And at the same time, I was being headhunted out by a friend I'd met who was former Victoria Police, who was working in the corporate field, and he took me to dinner. You can't make this stuff up. Within about a week of the conversation, and he said, "Look, I've got a position. Are you interested?" And I said, "Why would you want me, mate? I'm just a cop. I've been a police cadet the year I turned 17, so all I knew was policing." And he said, and I kid you not, he said, "Well, I love your personality. You're outspoken. You challenge ideas. You support people clearly. You're a people person. What you've done in policing and taken risks in certain activities tells me the kind of guy you are." He was telling me all the things that I was told weren't suitable for policing, were suitable for the corporate world. And I literally came home because I was going to be a lifer. My intention was to stay in the job until I had to retire.
Sure.
And I came home and I got a piece of paper and just free wrote for and against. And the only three reasons, I remember vividly, that I could come up with for staying as a policeman, a police officer, were camaraderie, job security, and adrenaline. I couldn't think of any other reasons. Right. And then I had all of these other things on the other side of the ledger, which were, development, encouragement, education, new experience, all of that stuff. And I looked at it all and thought, wow, does that actually tell me that I don't belong? And I formed the view that I'd always been a little different anyway. I didn't fall into what I perceived to be the image of the typical male Queensland cop, probably a little unfairly. I looked at the education level, the attitudes, and just probably social attitudes of a lot of police I'd worked with.
Right.
And I was in that mindset, and I just thought, oh, well, I've never really been one of them, so I probably should resign rather. And I just simply resigned. In hindsight, I could have pursued a medical stress option.
Yeah.
Didn't really, I was too proud to go down that path. I didn't want to admit that I was broken. I didn't want to admit anything was wrong. So, for me, image was important. Not for anybody else, but for me, my own self-image, my own self-worth. So I simply resigned, and then 3 months later, I was out.
I'm interested in that word broken. Is that how you described yourself at the end? I mean, you resigned and you had this opportunity maybe to morph into something different. But I'm kind of aware of the idea that, you don't leave being a police officer behind. It's kind of part of your identity. That word broken, did that relate to you, do you think, at that point?
Not then, no. No,
Oh.
it's only really in hindsight that I look back and look at how emotionally damaged and traumatized I was. I wasn't sleeping much. I was drinking every day. I had absolute underlying anger. And I look at it from a management perspective. I probably was a problem child.
Right.
I rebelled, all of that, but it was more when I look back on understanding now what trauma is and now how it affects the brain and it wires the personality and so on. I look back and go, oh my God, that 37-year-old detective sergeant was broken. I'd been through, situations where a mate had been killed in front of me, gunfight, all of that stuff. And I'd never acknowledged or accepted that I had a problem. And I talk to people now about, one of the keys of that trauma recovery is early intervention. There was no intervention. So, yeah, I was broken, which is why when on my last day at work, I went outside and burst into tears because it was such an emotional removal of my tribe and my identity and what I saw as my purpose. But I knew intuitively that I had to leave. If I hadn't left and continued the path I was going, I would have been divorced again. I probably would have been an alcoholic, and I would have been in a pretty bad place.
Yeah. It sounds like you can kind of see that looking back, can't you? Can kind of see that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. But when you're in the middle of it, you can't. You don't know what you don't know.
No.
I just thought that I had some issues, and and in hindsight, I had some bloody big issues.
Issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. It's hard to see. And look, it fits well with our grief work here at Griefline in the sense that sense of identity, that sense of loss. And I resonate with that word tribe. I think that's a really powerful way to describe it. I wonder then, after such a long time and faced with so many physical dangers, of course, one thing that stands out, I think, often is the idea of an emotional danger. Is there a way to compare the two, do you think? Do you see one as more significant than the other?
Yeah, that's a great question, mate. No one's asked me that before. I learned during my recovery about moral injury, and there is no doubt that I suffered from moral injury, which is an emotional blame game. I was formally diagnosed in 2019 with post-traumatic stress disorder. People are amazed. They go, "What? It's clear you had it for years." Yeah, I did. I just couldn't find the right psychologist, and I didn't accept that I had PTSD because I looked at it as something that people who've been through really dangerous situations would experience. And I look back on my career and think, yeah, okay, I probably fit that criteria. But I also have moral injury, and moral injury, it started. God, it's probably like PTSD anyway. It's like sediment building up in a river, or water filling a glass and one day it overflows. But my moral injury, certainly when I was undercover, I had to watch a young guy shot up with his first hit of heroin, and I was in a house watching two women do it, and I thought he was 17 or 18, still bloody young. But I was masquerading as a heroin dealer. I was there to score smack, and I wasn't able to intervene. And they shot him up because he was, he was being bashed by his father. And we learnt later after the operation was over, he was barely 14, probably 14 and a half, I think. And he died of an OD 4 years later. And that's been difficult for me to talk about for years because I constantly thought, what could I have done? What should I have done? What would I have done differently? And the answer is nothing. because I made a decision. Bear in mind, I was only a kid myself. I was probably then 23.
Wow.
You know, so that's moral injury. You know, I blamed myself for that circumstance and the way his life turned out for decades. And moral injury is, you know, you wish you could have done something that you couldn't do, or you should have done something that you couldn't do. And the other was with Flashdance when Peter King was murdered in the gun battle we were involved in.
Yeah.
I had survivor guilt over that. I now understand what it was. I just didn't know why I couldn't talk about it without crying, I didn't know why I could hardly sleep without having dreams and then all of those triggers. And that's emotional damage without doubt. When I talk about trauma, I tell people that, you know, imagine you've broken your femur or your elbow or your collarbone.
Physical, yeah.
Yeah, when you're injured emotionally and you're traumatized, your brain is broken. You know, your synapses don't work anymore. Your dopamine doesn't hit the way it should. Your cortisol won't go away. You know, you're in constant fight or flight because your body doesn't recognize that it's not in danger anymore, or your brain doesn't recognize you're not in danger anymore. So all of that emotional damage, it's trauma isn't what happens to you. Trauma is what happens to you as a result of what happened to you. Yeah. And a lot of people react. I stole it from Gabriel Mate, who's a doctor who's written a book called The Myth of Normal. Because a lot of what I've done, Brian, is I've bloody read and tried to figure shit out. A site can tell you certain things, and that's fantastic. I have a great one that I haven't seen for a while now. But a lot of it for me is listening, learning, reading, you know, looking at other people who've been down the same path and trying to figure out what's worked for them and what can work for me. And I've become probably lots more understanding now about trauma and about how the impact on me was affected by my belief systems and my values and how they were formed. You know, I grew up in a pretty ordinary childhood, so you know, I grew up in a domestic violence situation. So I had certain values and beliefs formed then. And I think that was part of me putting pressure on myself as a human being to be better and better and better than anyone else, because I didn't want to be like the people I grew up with, apart from my mum. My mum was beautiful, but there were other people in that whole environment who I never wanted to be like, you know, like the homophobic, redneck, white bashing, drunken, archetypal, if you were, Australian male of the 50s and 60s. So that puts a lot of pressure on yourself, you know, and when you internally think that you've failed, then you probably fall over more than other people would. So
yeah, really well put. I wonder about, you know, we use that word trauma pretty generally and loosely, don't we? But the trauma of your childhood, does that inform your decision to move into the cops? Is there a link there?
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, absolutely, mate. Yeah. You know, so when I was at school in year 8, I think, I joined the Army Cadets. In those days, the Army Cadet was you know, it's either the Army Cadets or the Scouting movement or something. And I joined both anyway. But the Army Cadets were great male role models who were teachers, who were commissioned officers, you know, running the company or the battalion or whichever the size of the school you're in. Taught me a lot, and I loved it. I went straight into that mode, and in fact, I was seriously considering joining Royal Military College, or in those days it was called Duntroon, because I found connection, tribe, good male role models, and it doesn't take a shrink to figure out why. And my stepfather was not, and part of no, actually, it's a major part of the decision I left to join the cops was because I wanted to do something with my life to protect people from bullies and predators. And I've spoken to a lot of cops over the years, of course, and it's a fairly common thing. You know, either they were bullied or they witnessed it, or they've been in situations where they felt powerless, so they wanted to contribute back. I know Gary Jubel, and I've spoken to Jubes about this quite openly, and that was part of his thing. And I think it's noble, but it's also a bit dangerous, because some human beings, if they join the cops and get the power of legislation and force and so on behind them, can then become bullies themselves. And I'm sure you've seen a bit of that as well.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I think it's a fairly common reason.
Yeah, that's right. I think I think most cops, I think, would have, there's a reason for the decision, because it's particularly those that remain and have a lasting career and a worthwhile career like yours. There has to be a reason why they maintain it, absolutely, or a motivation.
Yeah.
I think in the community too, my suspicion is that often people forget that cops are human.
Yeah.
They've got human brains, they've got human emotions, human thoughts. As brave and courageous and resilient as they are, they're still impacted by the trauma that they experience. I guess that might lead to you. I wonder, with this morphing into contributing to the community as you've done for such a long time in different ways, how do you maintain your own health now? What have you learned about what works for Keith?
That's another great question, mate. So to answer that in a little bit more detail, I spent more time in the corporate world than I did in the cops.
Right.
Although the cops formed a great percentage of how I view the world, and I was made redundant once in the role. First time it happened, it crushed me because it affected my self-esteem, and I thought, my God, they've made me redundant. No one loves me anymore. So took a couple of months, found another job, moved on. And then March 2022, I think, I was made redundant from a very senior role in a company I was in. I was the chief operations officer, and I expected it. It happens. My CEO retired, a new one came in. Within 3 weeks, he told me I had his total support, so I thought I'm in trouble here. And that's restructure. So it wasn't personal at all. But when it happened this time, I went, okay. And I thought about my reaction and thought, wow, my resilience level is obviously higher than I thought it would have been, because I took the opportunity then to sit and think what I'd like to do. And I didn't want to work in the corporate world anymore. I'd had it with the politics and the nuances and the personalities and the backstabbing and all of that stuff. And so I literally sat in my house. So I sat in my study where I am now for about 3 days and just planned out some things, made a couple of calls, and then started just figuring out what I'd like to do to contribute back. And it's all about network. I think the first time I did any speaking to a group was with the ADF. No, it was a high school first, then the ADF. And that was through someone who'd read my book and saw me speak on stage when I was a guest at a live show down here. And I just spoke about undercover work. And she contacted me and said, look, we're very keen to have you present. What do you think? So I put a presentation together about, resilience and what had worked for me and what I'd learned. And I had to fight through the imposter syndrome. Think, who'd want to listen to me? And what would I know? And then that just really encouraged me to keep going and then expanding. And I don't market myself, or I do get speaking gigs through word of mouth, etc. But I also love to spend time dealing with police veterans, military veterans, first responder veterans, etc. Because I know how challenging it is to think that it's only you that struggles. They think that it's only you that has these strange thoughts and these strange reactions to life and this joylessness and this lack of identity. And once you understand it's not you, not just you, then that's the first step for you going, holy shit, maybe there's just something I'm not imagining. So all through that, so this week I was in Brisbane and I presented to a wonderful group of people who work in the mental health and disability sector about trauma and thriving. Yeah. And I'm very conscious of, if it starts to impact me negatively, I will take a step away from it. Because again, I talk about things that are pretty confronting. Some of them are triggers, sure. But what I've learned is for too many years I hid my feelings about how these things affected me. I realize now that it's impossible to be the perfect person, that it's okay to be vulnerable, that it's okay to say, yeah, I've actually having a couple of down days as a result of this, or I talk to my wife and say I'm not myself. Yeah, I'm not 100%. I don't know why, and there's often no trigger. But the very fact that I can do that, the very fact that I am comfortable to say I'm flawed, I've got some problems, for me makes it much better, because I'm no longer I'm no longer spending all that energy trying to put the facade up, and that takes a lot of emotional energy. So, I reckon that the Holy Trinity is good sleep. Make sure you're eating well. Don't um, stop yourself from having a meat pie every little while if you want one. But, make sure you're eating well, make sure you're sleeping well, because when you sleep and you get out of the REM statement, you're just into deep sleep. It's like cleaning the cache on a computer. So you're resetting. And exercise, and I say to people, you don't need to run marathons, you don't need to do any of that. Just get out of the house 3 times a week and walk the dog or something, do some form of exercise. And for me, it's martial arts. So I train at a dojo 4 days a week. And there will be some days where I don't want to go, and I force myself to get in the car and I drive to one dojo. So I train in 2 different ones because I'm a glutton for punishment. I drive 40 minutes to one and I drive 40 minutes to the other, both in different directions. And I will, get there and go, oh, God, get out of my car, get into my gi, which is our training gear, and walk into the door, through the door, and I suddenly feel, I'm with my people, I'm with my tribe. We have a incredibly diverse range of people who train. I'm the only former copper. I think there's a former fiery, and that's it. Oh, there's a nurse, but the majority of people work in the corporate world, IT, tradies, whatever. But we all have the same purpose, the same shared joyful thing to do, and that's important for me. It's actually vital for me because if I don't train, I get twitchy, and that's how I keep ahead of stuff. And that combined with understanding what feelings are bubbling up. And I don't sit there and try to analyze them. I don't try to go, shit, what started this today? Have I read something? Have I heard something? Is it a particular date? Sometimes dates trigger it. I've learned to just let it happen. And I've learned to go, okay, I can feel it coming. What am I going to do? Right. Even though today's cold and horrible and freezing outside, if it was a day like that, I get in my gear, drive down somewhere and walk for about 10 k's along this beautiful winding path along the Yarra River, and listen to the birds and breathe and just, so that does that answer your question, mate? Does that make sense?
It does, absolutely. I think great tips. Absolutely. I really liked what you said about that word vulnerable, that kind of acknowledging how you're feeling, voicing it to someone else, voicing it to yourself, and then doing something with it. Yeah, what a powerful message. The other thing that came up when you spoke about the martial arts, really interesting. You use that word tribe again. There's tribe from the cadets, there's tribe in the cops, and there's tribe now. That seems to be something that, really drives you. I wonder about, and I'm just thinking, reflecting about the tribe in the mental health space. You've kind of found your people and you're contributing. Keith, often when I speak with police in particular, a lot of them in different ways, those that are still serving, those that have served, one of the things we talk about is the idea that family is on the journey with you. This is not just your journey, it's your family's journey, whoever that might be. I wonder if you can give us some tips on how family and friends in our community might support the cop, whether she or he is in or whether he or she is out. What's the tip there, do you think?
Geez, you're asking some bloody good questions, mate. I like that. And I guess I didn't embrace the support of my family for a long time because I felt they wouldn't understand. I didn't want to burden them. So I expended all this energy on being trying to be the happy father and partner. And all the time it was just bubbling away almost every day. Once I started understanding that I did have a problem, and I was, vulnerable enough to admit and sit down with my wife and daughters and say, I've got some dramas. They went, well, really? No shit.
We saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I sat with them individually and apologized to them for, I was never violent, but I was certainly emotionally distant. I had just stupid stuff like, if the old days of the landline phone, if the phone would ring at 6 p.m. when we were starting to sit down for dinner, I'd almost lose my shit and say, who's going to be ringing? You should be ringing. This is ridiculous, blah, blah, blah. If I opened the fridge door and something fell on the floor, I just had this red hot anger at the world. Again, never violent, but so I'd probably raise my voice a lot. I drank way too much. I admit that. Not proud of it at all, and I still have trouble stopping if I'm in a certain social situation with my mates. But I think with family seeing that, families pick up on personality and social cues and all that stuff. I think the best thing the family can do is, it's a tough one because we're all different, is leave the police officer when they come home, give them some space. Just be aware that they're doing a job that is not common. Well, it's not, I was going to say normal. That's not the right word, but it probably is. Cops see stuff that other people don't need to see. As you well know, we see the things people can do to each other, and that has an emotional toll. So that's one thing, but encourage them to understand that if they do want to talk about something, then you're there to listen to them, not to solve any issues, just to listen to them. Because cops will often not tell their family, their partner or their kids what is going on because they want to protect them. Most cops I know are incredibly protective of their children. My daughters, when they hit their teens, went, oh yeah, Dad was very protective. Right, where are you going? I'm going to pick you up. I'm going to, yeah. And I think that, we probably overcompensate a bit, but that's just the nature of the job. But, if you're okay to listen, it will take time. And the first time they do say, oh, well, look, this affected me. I went to a bad accident, or I went to a domestic, or I went to a dead body or something. Just listen to them. The other thing I highly recommend for families and partners to do is to read, it's escaped me, the Emotional Dealing with Law Enforcement. God, it's a great book. That, if you just bear with me, is really worth.
It's just the author from the States.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I can picture it, Keith. I can picture it, but I haven't got the name either. I apologize, but
oh God, it was right on the tip of my tongue too.
Yeah. That'd be helpful if you can find it. Yeah, I can.
Yeah, I've got it hidden not hidden. I've got it in my library. So, Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement.
Yeah.
And it's written by a guy who was a serving cop. And then he, I think he became a psychologist. So Kevin Gilmartin.
Yes.
So Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement, a guide to officers and their families. He has written it from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I know in Queensland Police, it's actually issued to every trainee who graduates because it's so powerful, and it's about exactly this subject.
Yeah.
It's a tricky one, because if you see that your partner is really struggling, probably the worst thing you can do is reach out to their colleagues and say, oh, I'm worried about them, because that can have all sorts of ramifications. I think if it's getting to a stage where it's really challenging, then go to a psychologist or a counsellor yourself and ask for advice, but often humans just want to talk. And if you can encourage them to open up and be authentic and let the floodgates out, that intervention can literally sometimes save lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good strategies. So I like that word human again. It's a good reminder. I actually had the benefit of hearing Gilmartin. He came to Australia. The Police Association, New South Wales, brought him out and came to a conference, and incredible yeah, incredible message. I'm really pleased that it's still there and people are being using it. Yeah. Just to follow that theme, Keith, I wonder about, you know, if and you kind of touched on it when you were, much younger and your friend kind of said, "Hey, come and work for me." You kind of said, "Well, what do I have to offer? I'm just a cop." Really common, and it fits with our grief and loss kind of theme here at Griefline. So many people say, "I'm just this," or "I'm just that." And it's a real tragedy in my mind, because I think, well, you've got so much to offer. How does a police officer, a nurse, a fiery, a veteran, how do they morph into this next thing? Do they have to leave behind their identity, or can they take the attributes they've got into their new place? I wonder. What do you reckon?
Oh, great. Again, mate, I actually had someone not track me down through the network, former undercover guy that I met back in 1995 here in Miami. And he found me through my social media, etc. Had a chat, met for coffee. And he said, "I've been wanting to thank you for 30, whatever it was, years." And I said, "What do I do?" And he said, "You won't remember it, but we're at the police club back in the days when you had a police club. And he said, you just resigned, and you said to me, cops underestimate their transferable skills by hundreds of factors." And he said, you talked about the ability to communicate with various people, the ability to communicate with a heroin user in the gutter 1 minute and a Supreme Court judge the next. The ability to multitask, the ability to read people, to take a mental breath and not panic. All of those things are incredibly transferable. And I was pretty chuffed that he'd been waiting all that time to tell me, because it actually informed his opinion to leave and pursue a successful career outside in, of all things, mental health. So I think the first thing people need to do is do an honest, it goes back to honest and authentic and vulnerable, self-audit, a skills audit, and not to take for granted what they do every day. So your average truck on the road or van on the road in Victoria, or the cars on the road in Queensland, the average shift are dealing with scores of jobs now. They hit the ground, there are 20 jobs waiting. So they know how to prioritize, they know how to communicate, they know how to deal with things quickly. All of those attributes, I have to say, are somewhat lacking in the corporate world. So it's about understanding that you can make decisions quickly, you can chat to people, you can diffuse situations. All of that is second nature to cops who've been on the road for more than 5 minutes. So that's a first. Well, it's probably not the first thing. The first thing is, if someone wants to leave the job, identify why. Is it because they're in a position that they don't like at the moment? Because where they sit at the moment is only a snapshot of their life. Things will change. Bad managers will retire or leave or resign. And I think that can be often a factor that first responders, police, paramedics, fireys, etc. Well, not so much the fireys, because they've got a great life, as we know. But I think
except when there's a fire.
Yeah, well, that's right. They've got to wake up. No, I love fireys. Like me, I resigned because of a person. And I didn't actually reach out to my friends and go, "Man, I've had enough, I'm going to pull the pin," for them to say, "Hey, you've got 12 months long service leave, go away, chill, come back and have a rethink." I didn't have that because I didn't talk to them. So the first thing is, why do you want to go and make sure it's authentic and genuine? The second is to do a skills audit. And then the third is to go, okay, what sort of job do I think I could do? So talk to your friends in the world who aren't in the police force. Reach out to them and say, is there anything I can do that isn't security or investigations? Because the answer is there are hundreds of things you can do. And then work towards it. So set yourself goals of education. Start doing your recognized prior learning when you're in the job that you're in. Make sure that you have your ammunition powder dry, as they say, and then start applying for roles. Yeah, and there's a whole different, as you well know, There's a whole different world out there when you're applying for corporate positions, and there are a lot of management positions that would just jump to have first responders. But it's a whole different way of approaching it, getting your CV, preparing for an interview, sitting an interview, and so on. And all of that takes a bit of practice, takes a bit of admitting that you probably don't have all the answers yet, and develop a thick skin. So if you do get knocked back, and you probably will get knocked back, in first half a dozen job interviews, okay, what have I learned from that, and then move on to the next. But I think it's that probably the spirit of the question is understand that you have value in the working world that is far and above writing tickets and locking someone up. Yeah. Police touch people every day of their lives, and they'll never know the ripple effect or the impact they have on them.
Great, what a great answer. A great message. That's right. That you're valuable as a police officer, and we're so appreciative of what you've done as a police officer, but you're equally valued in other places as well, if that's the right decision for you. And I like what you said there. Sometimes I think some police get to a point and think, well, right now I need to leave because of this. Well, let's see if we can change some environments to maintain that career. Fantastic, great answer. I'm really aware of your time. I've just got one more question. I hope you don't mind.
No problem.
And maybe a slightly different tact, but I think it's important. And the idea of storytelling, the idea of someone's narrative. I wonder whether you think it's helpful for others, but has it been helpful for you to sort of put your story to paper? Has that been almost therapeutic for you, do you think?
Oh, it's been definitely therapeutic, mate. Yeah. Definitely. Particularly my second book where I wrote about the tactical world and gunfight and loss and death and trauma. That whole, so I talk to people, there's different tips about maintaining mental fitness. So mindfulness, meditation, exercise, journaling, where, you spend 3 or 5 minutes a day just journaling what went wrong, what went right, or vice versa. That way you identify patterns in the way your brain and your emotions react to certain things. Writing my books was journaling on steroids. I actually literally again sat in this study during our wonderful lockdown during COVID when we were locked down for a long time. And I just started writing. I still don't regard myself as an author. I've been published and I'm forever pinching myself over that. I just write. I don't plan things. I don't do what authors are supposed to do. Although I have met a couple of guys in my network now who write exactly that way. Right. But it was incredibly, therapeutic to put it down on paper, and even more so knowing that thousands of people have read my stories who I'll never know. I'll never meet them. And I say in lots of media and podcast interviews and so on that I do, my fervent hope is that when someone reads one of my books, when they finish the book, they'll think, being a cop is much more than I thought it was. Being a cop is actually helping people, being affected by it, working through trauma, doing all of those things, so that the next time they see a marked police car, they may have a different attitude. They may think, wonder what those poor buggers inside that have been to already in their shift. And so all of that's helped as well. And it's just, it's given me the ability to face my demons, I guess, is probably something I haven't said before. For me to accept and understand that I was damaged and I was broken. Developing resilience is being almost broken, but bouncing back. So when I say broken, I was probably almost broken, and over the next 30 years, I've bounced back and bounced back and bounced back. And I will forever be grateful to the publishers for picking it up, talking to me, and agreeing to publish. I just, you don't make a lot of money as an author. For those out there listening, you think, oh, this is a way to get rich. Right. No, you don't. You don't make a lot at all. In fact, less than 10% mostly of a retail price, because the publishers take all the risk. But you don't write books like this to make money off them either. I'm just so, as I keep saying, mate, eternally grateful that Alan and Unwin published it, or them.
Yeah, fantastic. What a message for others, and what a great thing for you to have done, that storytelling idea. And what a great way to finish, that message that our first responders are experiencing grief, loss, and trauma every day in their personal life, in their professional life. And I often think, my wife and I were in the police for a long time too, Keith. And often when we see a marked police vehicle travelling under lights and sirens to go to a job, our first thought is, I hope those police are okay.
Exactly right.
And I think that, there's grief and loss in everything that they do. And you're a great advocate for supporting them. And Keith, thanks so much. What a privilege. I'm going to explore your website and read your books.
Oh, please
That's what
do.
I'm gonna
Yeah,
do.
thank you, mate. I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic, Keith.
And really, really nice to be invited on to have a chat, mate. And I love to, and I'm very flattered by your words. I love to talk about my journey and what I've learned from it as much as I can.
Yeah.
Not for any other reason than knowing full well there are people out there listening who will be going, wow, that resonates with me. I might actually have a look at that.
Absolutely.
I might start doing some exercise. I might start doing some meditation or whatever's going to work. So very, very happy to be here, mate. Thank you.
Fantastic, Keith. Thanks so much.
Have a great day.